They thought she was just a helpless widow losing her farm. But this reckoning is what everyone is talking about. It's a story of justice that will move you to tears. The black Mercedes kicked up dust as it rolled down the gravel road, a sleek predator out of place among the weathered barns and split-rail fences. Marcus Whitmore didn't bother looking at the landscape. He'd seen 100 properties like this, dying relics of an America that couldn't compete with progress. In 6 weeks, this would all be gone, replaced by luxury condos with names like Heritage Meadows or Pastoral Heights. Whatever marketing decided would make rich people feel nostalgic for a past they'd never lived. The farmhouse came into view, sagging like an old woman's shoulders, its white paint peeling in long strips. On the porch sat Eleanor Hayes, 74 years old, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus that would never come. Marcus checked his Rolex. This would take 20 minutes, tops. Sign the papers, cut the check, maybe let her cry a little if it made her feel better. He'd done this dance before. What he didn't know was that buried beneath the north pasture, under 40 years of dirt and silence, was a gravestone with a name that would bring him to his knees. Marcus had built an empire on knowing exactly what people needed to hear. Not what they wanted, what they needed. The difference had made him a billionaire before 40. Whitmore Development didn't just buy land, it acquired futures, transformed yesterday into tomorrow, and if a few old-timers got left behind, well, that was the cost of progress. His father had taught him that. Harold Whitmore had clawed his way up from nothing, and he'd raised Marcus to understand that sentiment was a luxury only the weak could afford. The old woman didn't stand when he stepped onto her porch. That was unusual. Most of them were so eager to please, so desperate to prove they were reasonable people who understood how the world worked. But Eleanor Hayes just looked at him with eyes the color of creek water, clear and deep and unreadable. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus Whitmore. He didn't offer his hand. She wouldn't take it anyway. I know who you are. Her voice was steady, not the quaver he'd expected. Your father was Harold Whitmore. Made his first fortune in steel. Lost it in the crash of '87. Made it back in real estate. Married 3 times. Died alone in a hotel room in Singapore. You inherited everything when you were 22. Marcus felt something cold touch the base of his spine. People didn't research him. People accepted his offers and thanked him for the opportunity. You've done your homework. I've had time. She gestured to the empty rocking chair beside her. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. We need to talk before you make the biggest mistake of your life. He should have walked away. Should have had his lawyers handle it, filed the eminent domain paperwork, let the courts do what courts do. But something in her voice, a certainty that had no business existing in someone about to lose everything, made him sit. Mrs. Hayes, I'm here to make you a fair offer. $3 million for the property. That's well above market value for land this far from the city. You can retire comfortably, buy a nice condo, travel if you want. My husband is buried on this land. So is his father, and his grandfather. The Hayes family has worked this soil since 1889. You want me to sell their graves so someone from California can have a view of the mountains? I'll relocate the cemetery. Proper headstones, perpetual care wherever you want. She smiled, and it wasn't kind. There are some graves you don't know about, Mr. Whitmore. Graves that aren't in any county record. Graves that tell stories your money can't buy. The hair on his arm stood up. Is that a threat? It's a fact, and before you leave here today, before you sign whatever papers your lawyers have drawn up, you're going to see something. After that, if you still want this land, I'll sign, but you have to see it first. Marcus checked his watch again. He had a conference call in 90 minutes. But the old woman was already standing, moving with surprising steadiness down the porch steps, heading toward the north pasture where the grass grew tall and wild. He followed because refusing felt like losing, and Marcus Whitmore didn't lose. The pasture stretched out like a green ocean, wind making waves in the tall grass. Eleanor walked with purpose, her path clearly worn from years of making this same journey. Marcus followed, his Italian shoes sinking into soft earth, grasshoppers exploding into flight with each step. The sun was high and hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. She stopped at a place where the grass grew differently, thicker and darker, as if the soil beneath held more life than the surrounding land. There was no marker, no headstone, nothing to indicate this spot was anything but random pasture. But Eleanor knelt, her old knees cracking like dry wood, and began pulling away the grass with her bare hands. "What are you doing?" "Showing you why this land isn't for sale at any price." Beneath the grass was dirt, and beneath the dirt, the edge of something stone. Marcus found himself kneeling beside her, his $1,000 suit be damned, helping to clear away the earth. His fingers touched cold marble, and together they uncovered a headstone that had been deliberately buried, deliberately hidden, deliberately preserved in darkness. The inscription was simple: Harold James Whitmore, born March 15, 1945. Saved August 8, 1963. Greater love hath no man than this. Marcus stopped breathing. "That's impossible. My father was born in 1944, not 45. And he never mentioned, he never said." "Your father lied about a lot of things, Mr. Whitmore. But he didn't lie about where he came from. He just never told you the whole truth." Eleanor sat back on her heels, her hands trembling now, not from age, but from emotion. "My husband's father, Robert Hayes, pulled your father out of the Potomac River on August 8, 1963. Your father was 18 years old, drunk, showing off for some girl whose name he probably never remembered. He drove his daddy's Cadillac right through a guardrail and into 15 feet of black water. Marcus's hands were numb. The stone was real. The dates were real. But none of this made sense. Robert Hayes dove in after him. Dove in even though he couldn't swim well, even though the current was strong, even though every logical bone in his body said to call for help instead. He got your father to the surface, got him breathing again, got him to shore, and in doing that, Robert's heart gave out. 42 years old, dead on the riverbank while your father coughed up water and lived. No, someone would have told me. There would have been records, news articles, something." Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, so old it was nearly transparent. She handed it to Marcus with steady hands. It was a letter, handwritten in the bold script of someone who'd learned penmanship when it still mattered. "Dear Mrs. Hayes," Marcus read aloud, his voice strange in his own ears. "I am writing to express my deepest gratitude for your husband's sacrifice. Robert Hayes saved my son's life, and there are no words adequate to convey what that means to our family. However, I must ask, for the sake of my son's future, that we keep the circumstances of that night private. Harold has a bright future ahead of him, and the scandal of drunk driving, even without legal consequences, could damage his prospects irreparably. In exchange for your discretion, I am prepared to offer a sum that I hope will provide some comfort in this difficult time." The letter was signed by James Whitmore Sr., Marcus's grandfather, a man he'd barely known who'd died when Marcus was 7. "He sent a check," Eleanor said quietly. $20,000. In 1963, that was a fortune. But my husband's mother, she sent it back. Wrote one line on the bottom of the letter: "You can't buy honor, and you can't pay for a life with a check." Marcus couldn't feel his legs. The stone, the letter, the whole impossible weight of it pressed down on him like water, like he was the one drowning now, 40 years too late. After that, your grandfather did everything he could to erase the story, paid off the police report, paid off the newspaper editor, paid off everyone who'd been there that night. Your father built his entire fortune on a life he didn't earn, didn't deserve, and never acknowledged. And when Robert's widow, my husband's mother, tried to tell people the truth, your grandfather's lawyers buried her in so much legal paperwork, she gave up. Died poor. Died forgotten. Died with the truth locked in her heart. Why didn't my father ever tell me? Because shame is a heavy thing to carry, Mr. Whitmore. And your father, for all his money and power, was a coward at his core. He knew what he owed. He knew the debt he could never repay. So he pretended it never happened, built his empire on sand, and died without ever saying the name Robert Hayes out loud. Marcus looked down at the headstone again. His father's name. His father's birth year, corrected. His father's true birthday, not the one listed on every document, every biography, every piece of his carefully constructed identity. This stone told the truth his entire family had spent millions to hide. The land deed, Eleanor continued. It has a clause, put there by Robert's mother before she died. If anyone in the Whitmore family ever tries to buy this property, the full story becomes public. Every detail, every payment, every lie. I've kept that promise for 40 years, Mr. Whitmore. Kept it quiet, kept this stone buried, kept your family's secret safe. But now you come here with your contracts and your condos and your casual cruelty, and I think maybe it's time the world knew the truth. The wind picked up, making the tall grass whisper secrets to itself. A hawk called overhead, its cry sharp and lonely. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant wondering where he was. Probably his lawyers ready with the paperwork. He didn't reach for it. What do you want? I want you to understand what honor means. I want you to know that some debts can never be repaid, but they can be acknowledged. I want you to stop being your father's son and start being the man you could have been if you'd known the truth from the beginning. Marcus stood on shaking legs, looked out over the pasture that held his father's real grave, the one that mattered more than the marble mausoleum in Forest Lawn. He thought about every deal he'd made, every property he'd taken, every person he'd convinced to sign away their history for his vision of progress. If I walk away from this deal, my board will ask questions. Then tell them the truth. If I tell them the truth, my father's reputation will be destroyed. Your father's reputation was built on a lie. Maybe it deserves to be destroyed. He wanted to argue, wanted to find some legal loophole, some way to make this make sense in the world he understood, where money solved problems and the past stayed buried. But the stone was real, the letter was real, and somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he'd locked away when his father taught him that sentiment was weakness, something cracked open. I need time. Time is what you're asking me to give up, Mr. Whitmore. Time with my husband's memory. Time in the home where we raised our children. Time in the only place on earth where I still feel him beside me. Eleanor's voice finally broke, tears cutting clean tracks down her weathered face. I'm 74 years old. How much time do you think I have left? How much time did Robert Hayes get after he saved your father? 20 minutes. 20 minutes of dying on a riverbank while your father lived another 52 years and never once said thank you. The conference call would have started by now. His assistant would be panicking. His lawyers would be billing hours. And none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. Marcus pulled out his phone. Not to check messages, but to make a call that would change everything. James, it's Marcus. Cancel the Hayes acquisition. Yes, I'm serious. No, I don't care what the investors say. Cancel it today. File the paperwork. And then I want you to do something else. I want you to set up a foundation. The Robert Hayes Memorial Foundation. Initial funding, $50 million. Purpose, to preserve family farms and protect property rights against corporate acquisition. Yes, $50 million. And James, I'm coming to the office tomorrow to make a statement. It's going to be about my father. It's going to be the truth. And when the board loses their minds, you're going to tell them I don't care. He ended the call and looked at Eleanor, who was staring at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. That's not enough, he said quietly. It will never be enough, but it's a start. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened in 1,000 small moments, each one a reckoning with the man Marcus had been and the man he needed to become. He held a press conference 3 days later, standing in front of cameras and microphones, telling a story the world had never heard. About a young man pulled from dark water. About a stranger who gave everything. About a family who'd kept a secret for decades because they'd been paid to, threatened into silence, buried under legal paperwork, and the crushing weight of a fortune built on borrowed time. The media went insane. Whitmore Development's stock dropped 17% in the first hour. 3 board members resigned. His mother called from her villa in Monaco, screaming about family loyalty and betrayal. Marcus listened to it all with a strange calm. like he was finally hearing the world clearly for the first time. Eleanor watched the press conference from her living room, her grown children gathered around her. When Marcus broke down halfway through, his voice cracking as he said Robert Hayes' name out loud, as he apologized to a dead man and a living widow and a truth that had waited 40 years to breathe, Eleanor wept. "Mama," her daughter said softly, "he's destroying himself on television." "No, baby," Eleanor whispered. "He's finally becoming himself." The Robert Hayes Memorial Foundation opened 6 weeks later. Marcus didn't just fund it, he ran it. Quit as CEO of Whitmore Development, sold his shares, moved out of his penthouse and into a small apartment near the foundation's offices. His ex-wife said he'd lost his mind. His former business partners said he'd thrown away a dynasty. His father's old friends stopped returning his calls. Marcus had never been happier. The foundation saved 19 family farms in its first year, provided legal defense against predatory developers, funded agricultural programs, created grants for widows and widowers trying to hold on to land that held more than just dirt, that held memory and history and the bones of people who'd mattered. Every property they saved, Marcus visited, walked the land, learned the stories, understood what his father had almost taken from Eleanor Hayes and from how many others. On the anniversary of Robert Hayes' death, Marcus drove back to the farm. Eleanor was waiting on the porch, same rocking chair, same steady eyes. But this time, when he climbed the steps, she stood. This time, when he offered his hand, she took it. "I've been working on something," he said, "with your permission." He led her to the north pasture, where the grass still grew tall and wild. But now there was a path, stone and gravel, winding through the green to the place where the headstone had been buried. Except it wasn't buried anymore. The grave was beautiful. The headstone had been cleaned and restored, and around it was a small garden, native wildflowers and river stones, a bench made of oak. But that wasn't all. Next to Robert Hayes' grave was a second stone, newly placed, precisely carved. Harold James Whitmore, 1944-2016. Lived a borrowed life, died with an unpaid debt. May the truth finally set him free. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "You buried him here?" "Had him moved from Forest Lawn last month. His third wife wasn't happy, but legally, as his son, I had the right." Marcus's voice was thick. "He should be here, next to the man who gave him everything, next to the truth he spent his whole life running from. Maybe in death, he can finally say thank you." They stood in silence, the wind moving through the grass like breathing. Marcus had lost almost everything. His fortune had been cut in half by the foundation and the legal battles with his own company. His social circle had evaporated. His name, once synonymous with success and power, was now complicated, controversial, the subject of business school ethics debates and op-eds about corporate responsibility. He'd lost everything that his father had taught him to value. And in return, he'd found something his father never had. Peace, purpose, a life that wasn't built on someone else's sacrifice. "Your father," Eleanor said finally. "I hated him for a long time. Hated what he took from my family, what he stole by staying silent. But seeing him here now, next to Robert, I think maybe there's grace even in this. Maybe even cowards can find redemption if their children are brave enough to tell the truth. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of lying." She smiled, and this time it was kind. "That's what bravery is, son. Being tired enough of the lie to risk everything for the truth." Marcus visited the graves every month after that, brought flowers, pulled weeds, sat on the oak bench and talked to two dead men about the price of living, the cost of silence, and the weight of debts that can be acknowledged but never fully repaid. The foundation grew. Other children of powerful men started coming forward, telling stories about their fathers' hidden shames, their borrowed successes, their unpaid debts to people history had forgotten. Some followed Marcus's path, choosing truth over reputation. Others couldn't do it, couldn't bear the cost of honesty. Marcus didn't judge them. He understood the weight of carrying a father's sins. Eleanor lived to be 81. She died in her sleep. in the farmhouse where she'd been born, married, raised her children, and buried her husband. At her funeral, Marcus stood before a packed church and told the story one more time, about courage and sacrifice, about a man who jumped into dark water knowing he might not come back up, about honor that couldn't be bought or buried or silenced forever. "Mrs. Hayes taught me," he said, his voice carrying to the back pews, "that some reckonings can't be avoided. They can only be delayed. My father delayed his for 52 years. I delayed mine for 43. But the truth has its own timeline, and eventually it finds a way to breathe." They buried Eleanor next to her husband, in the north pasture, under the big sky she'd loved. Her children asked Marcus if he wanted to say a few words at the graveside. He shook his head. "I said my piece. Now I'm just going to listen." And he did, stood there in the tall grass as the preacher spoke, as Eleanor's grandchildren cried as the wind carried away another generation of people who remembered what honor meant. When it was over, when everyone had left, Marcus stayed, sat on the oak bench between 3 graves, 3 lives, 3 truths, finally told. His phone buzzed. A text from the Foundation's director. Another farm saved. Another family able to stay on land that held their history. Another small victory against the machine of progress that ground up memory and spit out profit. Marcus looked at the 3 headstones, the evening light making the carved letters glow gold. "We're not even close to even," he said to the graves. "But we're trying. God help us. We're trying." The sun set over the pasture, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. A screen door slammed. The ordinary sounds of life continuing, of time moving forward, of the world spinning on despite loss and pain and the complicated mathematics of debt and redemption. Marcus stood, brushed the grass from his jeans, and walked back toward his car. Tomorrow there would be more work, more farms to save, more stories to honor, more truths to tell. The reckoning wasn't a single moment. It was a lifetime of moments, each one a choice to be better than the lie, braver than the silence, more honest than the fear. He'd lost an empire, but he'd found something his father never had, a reason to wake up that didn't involve crushing someone else's dream. A legacy that wasn't built on borrowed time and unpaid debts. A name that might eventually mean something other than shame. The reckoning everyone was talking about wasn't just about Marcus Whitmore. It was about all of them. Every person who'd ever inherited a lie and had to decide whether to keep it alive or let it die. Every child of powerful people who'd faced the choice between protecting a reputation and honoring a truth. Some would choose reputation. Marcus understood that. The weight of family loyalty was real, the cost of honesty was high, and not everyone had the strength to pay it. But for those who did, for those who chose truth over comfort, justice over inheritance, honor over empire, there was Eleanor Hayes on her porch, steady-eyed and certain, holding the deed to land that was never for sale at any price. There was Robert Hayes in the dark water, diving in even though he couldn't swim well, even though the current was strong, even though logic said to wait for help. There was the truth, patient and persistent, waiting however long it took to breathe. And there was Marcus Whitmore, driving away from the farm as the last light faded, heading back to his small apartment and his borrowed life and his daily choice to honor a debt he could never repay, but could spend the rest of his life acknowledging. That was the reckoning. Not a single moment of justice, but a lifetime of small choices to be worthy of the sacrifice someone else had made. To live a life that honored the truth instead of hiding from it. To build something that would last longer than a reputation, deeper than a fortune, truer than a lie. And in the end, maybe that was enough. Not payment in full, but an acknowledgement, a beginning. A man on his knees in tall grass, finally understanding what his father's life had cost, and choosing to pay forward what he could never pay back. The reckoning everyone was talking about. A story of justice that moved them to tears, but more than that, a story of transformation. Of a man who lost everything that didn't matter and found the one thing that did, the truth. Finally, after all these years, the truth.